How's everyone doing? Welcome to Conspiracy Corner Podcast. This will either be podcast number 1 or podcast number 2. I'm not sure. We recorded one the other day and it needed a little bit of editing done to it, so this might be the pilot, which we've had other podcasts in the past, but this is kind of our official starting of it. So this episode is going to be on Loch Ness Monster. I actually just started studying Loch Ness. Picked up an issue of a magazine the other day. Just kind of figured it'd be kind of a good way to start, because I've jumped into just about any other conspiracy out there except for not really have studied much of like Loch Ness or Sasquatch or, I ain't gonna lie, Roswell, some of the classics, So I figured I'd delve into it and do a little podcast on what I've learned so far. For right now, we'll start off with, honestly, like a little origins of the Loch Ness itself and kind of a little background info on it. Loch Ness is situated in the Scottish Highlands, somewhat impreciously defined region north of and west of the Highland Boundary Fault. This boundary defines the very different landscape of the Highlands and the Lowlands, which are exactly what their names imply. The loch was created over 300 million years ago by a tectonic plate collision that distorted the landscape, forming towering mountains and deep gorges. Over the years, the latter filled with water, using loch, the Irish and Scottish Gaelic term for lake or sea inlet. The three separate lakes were named Loch Oich, Loch Loki, and Loch Ness. The name Ness comes from the river Ness that flows from the lake and derived from the old Celtic word for the roaring one. The loch itself. Ness is substantial like its monster and requires nearly as much food, roughly 24 miles long and half a mile wide. It averages 433 feet deep, 754 at its deepest known point. The lake is fed by 7 major rivers and dozens of streams and holds close to 263,000 million cubic feet of water. In fact, Loch Ness contains more fresh water than the combined lakes of England and Wales. For millennia, the waterways that flowed into Loch Ness have loosened particles of peat from the mountains. These partially decomposed fragments fill the loch, giving it its murky appearance. It's literally impossible to see more than 5 feet down. The great body of water is situated somewhat precariously along the Great Glen Fault, despite the fact that tremors have been recorded there for the past 150 years. The loch functions as a reservoir, supplying power throughout Great Britain. The fault is interesting for another reason. It is now being examined as both the new deepest spot of the lake and a potential hiding place for Nessie. Three-dimensional sonar imaging suggests a depth of 889 feet with long hump-like anomalies that could just be the monster. There's no image on here of that. I might be able to find it. I might not. If I can, I'll post it on here of the sonar images. The loch also has a single surviving crannog or artificial island, Eileen Murique Murdoch's Island, located at its southwestern end. In 1908, when waters receded, researchers discovered it was artificial and ingeniously constructed base of oak, covered with rubble and tree trunks, which was itself blanketed with large stones. Situated 150 yards from shore, it was likely built in the Iron Age. The island was tiny, just 60 by 168 feet, and in the 15th century was known to house a rock and oak fortress, now called Cherry Island. The spot of land is even smaller due to the rising water levels caused by the construction of the Caledonian Canal. The modern Cherry Island is just 60 by 48 feet. In the early 1800s, a second island became totally submerged by elevated waters. This was a natural body of land called Eilean nan Con, Dog's Island. As the name implies, it was believed to have been the site of a hunting lodge. But that's just a little background info of the actual loch itself. We're going to jump right into the conspiracy, the nitty gritty of the stuff, the supernatural, paranormal, conspiracy part of it. Just because that's what this channel is based on, because there's quite a lot of history in general on it. But this is a conspiracy podcast, not really a history one, so. I made 2 videos in the past that one of them was a Led Zeppelin and sigils, symbols being used in their artwork. I promised you all a sequel to that, so I'm actually going to do that sequel within this podcast because it actually falls under Loch Ness, the sea monster, and the Nessie and the actual Loch Ness itself. So, but even before Nessie, the area around Inverness and Loch Ness began getting a reputation for strange happenings. In 1899, Boleskine House, an 18th century manor on the southwestern side of Loch Ness, became home to occultist Aleister Crowley, and rumors of black magic, unholy rites, and secret tunnels running from Boleskine House to parts unknown spread through Inverness. Crowley wasn't the only famous Boleskine House resident. Actor George Raft was charged with selling shares in a pig farm located on the property, a farm that did not exist. And Led Zeppelin guitarist Jimmy Page owned the manor for 22 years. Starting in 1970. While he rarely lived there, he claimed its energy influenced his songwriting. Beyond Boleskine House, Inverness continued to gain prominence. On September 7, 1921, became the first city aside from London to host a British cabinet meeting. English Prime Minister David Lloyd George, King George V, and several other English officials had been vacationing in various parts of Scotland. When Irish patriots made a strong demand for full independence, their meeting would eventually result in an Anglo-Irish treaty, which gave Ireland self-determination rights as well as allowing Northern Ireland, which embraced being British, the right to withdraw from the Irish Free State. So there you have it. A little more occult information on Led Zeppelin, Aleister Crowley, and Loch Ness. Like I said many times before in other videos, everything seems to tie together with the occult and conspiracies. Everything's kind of connected. But there was one more part that I was going to mention. I made a video a while back on Christopher Columbus seeing green UFO. Kind of hidden, forbidden history that they don't teach you in schools. So not only did Christopher Columbus have a UFO experience, he also had a mermaid experience. So in 1493, none other than Christopher Columbus claimed to have seen 3 mermaids, which he described as female forms, that rose high out of the sea, but was not as beautiful as they are represented. So I don't know, I just thought that was odd. I figured I'd give you that little bit on what I've learned on that. I just thought it was strange, that we don't really hear much about that. Let's see. there's a particular character which I found interesting when I was studying. Um, it's actually kind of Christian history. His name is Saint Columba. There's actually two little stories in here that kind of cover the paranormal and cover Loch Ness in general, the monster, and encounter. Uh, in 565, a Christian evangelist, Saint Columba, reportedly came to the Craig Fadrig fort. Legend holds that pagan-picked King Brede initially bolted the doors when Columba approached. Columba responded by making the sign of the cross, knocking and laying his hand on the door. The bolts shot back and the door flew open. He entered to find an understandably consolatory King Brede, who was said to have then converted. Which is a crazy story. And here's a mention of an encounter with the same saint, Saint Columba, and his encounter with the Nessie. While traveling in 1565 AD, the Christian missionary Saint Columba and his party came across a group of Picts who were burying a man by the river Ness. The villagers told Columba a water beast had killed the man while he was swimming. Columba immediately ordered one of his followers to jump in the river. The monster, which had been lying in wait, surfaced and swam towards the man. Columba made the sign of the cross, and as locals say to this day, said, "Go no further, do not touch the man, go back at once." The monster halted mid-stroke and dived under the water. Columba and his followers resumed their journey, leaving behind a band of converts. There's another little fragment that I found interesting in this magazine, which anyone who follows the channel knows that I'm an ancient astronaut theorist and have a lot of interest in Sumerian mythology and Mesopotamia. There's a little fragment says in Mesopotamia the sea creature was Tiamat. Though Tiamat was a goddess of the sea, she was also believed to take the form of a serpent or dragon. As with Leviathan, Tiamat met her demise at the hands of a deity. In this case, the storm god Marduk. Afterward, his body was split to create the earth and the sky. So I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. But honestly, I'm going to give you several short little parts that I found interesting in researching. Here's another thing that I found interesting for anyone who's a fan of the movie Braveheart and Celtic and Gaelic and Scottish history. Apparently, in 1307, Scottish King Robert the Bruce captured Inverness Castle and demolished it. That's the castle which resides on Loch Ness. Robert the Bruce was the one who betrayed William Wallace and then avenged his death pretty much after he betrayed him, and took rebellion against England. So just thought that was a neat little side note. There's another little part here. Loch Ness, the lake, is not only known for its monster, it's known for actually a ghost story. Loch Ness itself was achieving notoriety, even outside its most famous aquatic resident. On December 31st, 1940, a Vickers Wellington bomber used for training missions had engine trouble and went down in the loch's water. 3 of its 4-person crew parachuted to safety, but 20-year-old Sergeant John Stanley Fensom's chute became tangled in one of the plane's wings, and he was dragged to a watery death. In 1978, a man named Peter Smithson reported seeing a ghostly figure wearing an out-of-date military uniform emerging from the waters of Loch Ness, dragging a parachute behind him. The figure did not speak. All it did was turn and point to the waters. In 1985, the bomber was recovered from the place in which the figure had pointed. Happily, Loch Ness itself has more to offer than monsters, bombers, and practitioners of the dark arts. Apparently, there's more creatures similar to the actual creature Loch Ness, Nessie, the Plesiosaur type creature. So I'm going to list off several different ones in different areas of the world that have been sighted all over. You have the Ogopogo, the second most famous lake monster after Nessie. This resident creature of Canada's Okanagan Lake is also called Naitaka, notorious for eating animals and humans. It was referred to by First Nations people as far back as 1860. Documentation of Ogopogo dates to 1926 and includes massive footprints which seem to suggest that the beast came ashore on occasion. Nearby Rattlesnake Island was quick to claim it was the birthplace of Ogopogo, mostly to drive resort hotel business. And then you have Champ, which is a pretty famous one that I've heard of. Affectionately nicknamed Champy, the creature is the elusive star of Lake Champlain, a 125-mile-long body of fresh water that is shared by New York, Vermont, and Quebec. Champ's lineage dates back to the Native American accounts that called it Tadoshok. Champ got its current name for Samuel de Champlain, supposedly the first European to sight the creature, though the account has been linked to a fake quote printed in the 1970 Vermont Lifestyle magazine. In July 1819, a river captain reported seeing a black monster 187 feet long, with a head resembling a seahorse, that reared 15 feet out of the water. In 1873, P.T. Barnum offered a $50,000 reward for Champ's hide. Dubbed America's Loch Ness Monster, Champ has been protected by a safe haven law since the early 1980s. Then you have Flessie, the flathead lake monster, is native to Eponymous Lake in Montana at the southern tip of the Rocky Mountain Trench. Accounts of this creature date to 1889, when it was supposedly shot at by a passenger on the steamboat U.S. Grant. There have been more than 100 sightings in the past century, generally describing Flessie as long and eel-like, around to 30 to 40 feet in length, with large black eyes. Some accounts report more than one creature, either a male and female or a mother and child. The most notorious story has to do with a 3-year-old child who fell into the lake and claimed to have been rescued. The flathead monster lifted me up. She had a baby too. Tahoe Tessie is another one. Sightings of Lake Tahoe's namesake sea serpent tend to peak during tourist season, leading to short-lived establishment of not only a museum but a Situation T hotline for tips, variously described as everything from a giant sturgeon to a 60-foot serpent. Tessie is rumored to live beneath cave rock. Despite dozens of purported sightings, not a shred of proof has been established. Then you have Bessie. Sightings of Lake Erie's South Bay Bessie date to 1793, when she was described as at least 16 feet long. By 1817, she was reported as nearly 40 feet in length, and by 1892, she was more than 50 feet long and 4 feet wide. Either she has grown or the legends had. Bessie inspired a roadside sculpture near Ohio's Route 2 named Lemmy for Lake Erie Monster, which stood for about 20 years until it was damaged and removed. Then you have the Manipogo, most often reported as a gigantic snake or a titan boa, 12 to 50 feet long with a sheep-like head. This creature is also known as Winnepogo, since its home, Lake Manitoba, connects with Lake Winnipegosis. Manipogo has been sighted since the 1800s, and eyewitnesses have described seeing as many as 3 swimming together. Memphrey is the rumored denizen of Lake Minframog, which links Quebec with Vermont. Was described in a verse in 1926. They saw a monster dark and grim, coming with a cool surge and swim, with lifted head and tusk and horn, fierce as the spirit of Hades born. The Royal Canadian Mint even issued a Memphre coin. Old Ned is rumored to inhabit a Lake Utopia in Charlotte County, New Brunswick. Has been sighted supposedly since before Europeans came to this continent. Serpentine or eel-like, black, and up to 50 feet long. It's often thought to be an oarfish. Old Ned is purported to migrate between the lake and in the Atlantic Ocean in a cycle of 3 to 5 years, suggesting that all these monsters might be a single beast that visits various lakes worldwide. Nahulido was reported during the 19th century in Huapi Lake in Patagonia, Argentina. This is another candidate often described as modern Plesiosaur. Up to 150 feet in length, it was described as an animal with a huge neck like a swan, and the movements made me suppose the beast to have a body like that of a crocodile. One popular theory held that Nahuledo might be the result of a nuclear experimentation by German scientists during the Peron regime in 1950s, which in Argentina, German scientists 1950s, I would not be surprised after finding out that a lot of ex-Nazi scientists ran to Argentina in hiding. Muso, the Diablo balena, or devil whale of Lake Tota in Colombia, was first reported by a priest in 1676 who described it as a fish with a black head like an ox and larger than a whale. Some thought it was an actual dragon, the kind pictured in the scariest maps of unknown oceans. Storjude Juret, the Great Lake monster of Lake Storstjön in Jämtland, Sweden, was sighted as early as 1635 and described as a strange animal with a cat-like head and a black serpentine body. It was also said to be dreadfully large and worm-like, ranging up to 42 feet in length, and it has inspired local monuments. You have the Lariosauro. Lake Como in Italy has a monster, Larry for short, was spotted by fishermen in 1946, then described by divers in 1957 as having a head of a crocodile and feet like a reptile. Also known as Larius lacus, lizard from Lario, it was once purported to be an extinct type of Nothosaur, Triassic marine reptiles. In 2003 it was described as an eel. Yamba, Africa teams with legendary monsters such as the Ninki Nanka, a giant crested serpent associated with rainfall, the Nyami, a dragon-like guardian god spirit of the waters, and the Inkanyamba of Howick Falls in South Africa, a gargantuan serpent with a finned mane, a horse-like head, and 4 flippers. According to the Zulu myth, it resides in a pool at the bottom of the falls of the Kwa Nakaza, the place of the Tall One. The beast's anger supposedly caused sensational storms, and it can fly, taking to the sky annually in tornado to seek a mate. Let's see, you have the Van Golu Canavari, a dinosaur-like monster, was reported in 1995 in Lake Van and south of Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. The Lake Van monster, Van for short, was subsequently described as 50 feet long with dark mottled skin, 2 eyes on top of its head, and sharp triangular humps on its back. It's reportedly the star of a 1997 video, although Turkish researchers claim that it shows a swimming elephant. You have the Morag, Not to be outdone, Nessie's stomping ground Scotland is host to many other loch monsters, the most documented loch legend after Nessie. This loch morer creature is described as 25 to 30 feet long with a head about foot wide, rough brown skin, and 3 dorsal humps. In some accounts, Morag is a mermaid. You have Lizzie, which is Loch Loki, and just down the Great Glen from Loch Ness. Most of the evidence claiming to support Lizzie's existence consists of unexplained wake trails in the water's surface. A quick glimpse of a fin or a paddle is the most that has ever been seen, usually by visitors or tourists. You have Wee Oki, a resident of Loch Oak, and a freshwater loch in the Scottish Highlands. And you have the Sile League, a serpent that hails from fantasy-inducing Loch Shile, that purported secret location of Black Lake in the Harry Potter stories and the fictional birthplace of Connor and Duncan MacLeod from the Highlander films. So there's some other Nessie-like creatures. I think I'm going to wrap this up though. There's more info that I'm going to put out there, but I think I'm going to do this in parts. Sorry I was a little soft-spoken, but I'm filming super early in the morning right now, and I don't want to wake anyone up. So I hope the audio turned out alright. But let me know in the comments what you all thought. Check out those other videos. I have a video on Columbus talking about the UFOs, which I mentioned earlier. And then there's a part 1 video. This could be considered honestly the part 2 video. I just figured kind of throw it all in as one big video, considering they're all connected. It's a video on Led Zeppelin and the use of sigils in their artwork, their ties to the occult. So thank you all for listening. Like and subscribe, comment down below, and y'all have a good day.